Hello, and welcome to this podcast on project bank accounts. This is a part of a series of short podcasts to complement learning provided through National Highways contract development and assurance awareness guides that can be found on the intranet. My name is Liz, and I'm joined today by Matt Powell from Cost Intelligence. Matt, thanks for joining. I'd like you to start by just giving us a brief introduction about yourself and your role within National Highways, please.
Thanks for having me. So since joining the organisation in 2017, I've been involved in project bank accounts. Now, initially that was handling the more business as usual activities and then evolving through dealing with more project-based and strategic elements. And I actually now lead the project bank account workstream, and I offer support internally and externally as a subject matter advisor.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome. May I start by asking you to just tell us briefly, what is a project bank account?
A project bank account, or PBA, as it's commonly abbreviated to, is just a ring-fenced bank account, typically deployed and used on construction-based contracts that the client, which is National Highways in our case, deposits payments into. So the account itself is opened and managed by the lead contractor, but any funds that are deposited are completely ring-fenced and secured because the account has trust status, meaning that money can only be debited to pay the subcontractors or the supply chain members who are working on behalf of the lead contractor. And those companies are known or as defined as beneficiaries to the trust. And there are important benefits of using a secure payment vehicle on a contract as opposed to just making direct payments to the lead contractor, which we'll come on to shortly.
Okay, thanks. And so how does a project bank account work?
Well, quite simply, following receipt of an application for payment from the lead contractor, the client, or National Highways, deposits funds into the PBA. It's then the responsibility of that lead contractor to make the subsequent payments to the members of the supply chain within contractual timescales. So National Highways don't actually operate the account in any way, but we do have the contractual leverage to monitor how quickly payments are being executed to the supply chain. And as we'll see, fairly shortly, that prompt payment is one of the key aims and purposes of using a project bank account. It's also important to stress that it's mandatory that any surplus funds that are owed to the supply chain and are not yet ready due for payment must remain in the PBA so that they are protected and ring-fenced.
Great, thanks, Matt. That's really nice and clear. So what are the benefits of project bank accounts?
So project bank accounts address historic unfair payment practices within the construction industry as a whole. And it was quite commonplace to see subcontractors waiting up to 90 to 120 days to receive payment from lead contractors. And by using PBAs, that time frame is reduced to 7 days or even less in some cases from the point that National Highways release funds into the account. Now, for small to medium enterprises, also known as SMEs, there are really significant and key cost savings associated with using PBAs. Receiving your payment promptly avoids the need for borrowing or for entering into costly disputes with lead contractors, and in a general sense just improves trust and collaboration. And one of the most significant purposes or aims of a PBA is the impact of ring fencing and securing those funds. Now, those funds are totally protected if the lead contractor was to go into insolvency. They can't be absorbed by the contractor or pretty much touched by any insolvency practitioner. And a prime example of this benefit in action is the collapse of Carillion in 2019. Now, due to National Highways applying PBAs, the losses that we experienced and observed on to the supply chain on our Carillion-based projects were definitely minimal compared to other areas of the industry.
Thanks, Matt. You mentioned a number of benefits there and actually really nicely brought to life by that example at the end. Could you just elaborate further on why National Highways applies PBAs?
Yep, so ultimately, project bank accounts offer certainty of payment to the supply chain. And that's a really important factor for any project with an extensive supply chain that has a large proportion of SMEs, such as the makeup of a supply chain within the construction industry. Now, along with a corporate social responsibility, there are a couple of commercial drivers behind National Highways PBA policy. Now, if we look at sustainability in a challenging economic environment, the risk of a company going into insolvency is definitely elevated. So by mandating prompt payment, we're ensuring that any cash flow constraints or issues are alleviated, and we're ultimately just reducing the financial strain and pressure applied on our suppliers. So if we have a larger pool, or if we're able to maintain a larger pool of suppliers, this is going to help National Highways to achieve a better value for money. There's going to be greater competition. There's going to be a better balance between supply and demand, and also ensures that the supply chain is actually out there with the capability to deliver our schemes. And the second point to that is that National Highways' portfolio of projects is in competition with other public bodies or private enterprises. So if a member of the supply chain has the option, if they're diverse enough to work in different areas, if they're getting that certainty of payment by working on a National Highways-led project, that's going to be an influential factor when that supplier is considering in which direction to move.
So we've covered quite clearly now the why of PBAs. Could you explain a bit of the how National Highways includes PBAs within contracts?
Yep. So National Highways adopt the NEC model of contracts, and this includes an optional YUK1 clause, which covers the use of a project bank account in relation to the works. Now, PBAs are mandated for all contracts. However, we try to be cognizant of instances where the benefits are going to be limited and pretty much outweighed by the costs of deploying a PBA. And these are mainly administrative costs rather than anything financial. So what we do is we look to apply exemptions retrospectively post-award, where perhaps the presence of supply chain who can reap those benefits is quite limited. And they tend to be consultancy-based contracts or perhaps technical service-based contracts. One key point to know is that when a PBA is deployed, members of the supply chain have to actually sign a piece of documentation to become recognized as beneficiaries. So what we're seeing is that there's a need to opt in to become part of a PBA. Now, where the value of a piece of work is below a certain threshold, or if the duration that a subcontractor working on a project is going to be quite limited or low, you might ultimately see those suppliers not being signed up to a PBA because they fall outside of those thresholds that are deemed mandatory by National Highways. So to address that deficiency, we've recently worked with legal stakeholders to draft a really significant update to our contract wording, whereby all members of the supply chain are actually signed up by default. So they're signed up automatically without the need to sign any documentation. So that mechanism effectively is reversed and sort of flipped on its head in a way. So from rather going into opt-in, it's now an opt-out mechanism. And you opt out, if a subcontractor decides that a certain alternative arrangement is seen as more favourable. And what that does is really maximises the benefits and ensures that those suppliers who would benefit most from the protection that perhaps fall into that bracket of low value and short duration work, such as sole traders, are indeed covered by the PBA.
And has this requirement ever been challenged by our contractors?
Yeah, this is an interesting point. So from the perspective of a lead contractor, project bank accounts could be viewed as a hindrance. Without using PBAs, a lead contractor has that ability to hold on to the cash that is really owed to the lower levels of the supply chain, and that cash can be used for all sorts of reasons, either to make themselves look cash rich or to divert cash to different areas of their business. But I think in a broader sense, PBAs have obviously been in operation for over 10 years. It's starting to be more recognised and widely accepted that they offer a more higher level kind of benefit in a longer term view. So whilst a lead contractor may not be able to manipulate cash as they would like, there is an agreed understanding and view that PBAs are there for the long term benefit of the industry as a whole. In terms of kind of more tangible challenges, one recent issue that had to be circumvented was a challenge faced by our contractors on the scheme delivery framework. A large portion of those contractors hadn't actually entered into direct contractual relationships with National Highways in the past, PBAs were definitely a new concept to them. And typically being on the slightly smaller scale, they did appear to have less financial clout. And that sort of restricted their ability to deploy project bank accounts with their chosen providers, in a timely manner.
So when these challenges come up, how do National Highways typically respond to or work with those?
Yeah, so we're always constantly engaging and collaborating with our contractors. We build close relationships to various contacts at those entities and those contractors, and we always want to make sure that any requests or mandatory requirements we have on PBAs are pragmatic. So in response to the feedback from SDF suppliers, we actually decided to try and approach the banks, form closer working relationships, just to ensure that the actual market as a whole has the products available that we're asking our contractors to go and open and deploy. And the sort of newly found relationships we have with banks just gives us an avenue and a gateway to be able to hold conversations and open the door to smaller scale companies that become part of the National Highway supplier base and enable them to more seamlessly acquire a PBA. But I think the final point on this is that ultimately PBAs are not there to burden our contractors, but they're there to drive positive outcomes and better behaviours for all the stakeholders and the construction industry as a whole.
Matt, thank you. That brings us to a close for this podcast. So really, thank you very much for being here with me today. Back to those of you who are listening, this has been a CDNA podcast on project bank accounts. If you'd like to listen to other podcasts in the series, you can search for CDNA on the intranet and you'll find the list of all the available podcasts there. Thanks very much for listening.